Okay, listen, I didn't come here this morning to try to convince you that Finland has the best education system in the world, because there are very few people in Finland who think like this. Because for us, I think it's enough that we are better than Sweden, but everything else really doesn't matter too much. But now when I travel around the world, I meet so many ministers and state leaders and educators who have set their goal to the future so that they want to be the best in the world. And I think this is it's not necessarily the smartest way to think about improving education, because it's, in the end of the day, it's very difficult to say how do you define the best education system in the world. And we have to remember, Scott, you mentioned the OECD PISA, these international studies. They're only looking at the one very small part of our education system. It's what 15-year-olds can do in math and reading and science, but there are all sorts of other things that we should be including in the conversation if we want to speak about goodness of education. And this is one reason why many Finnish teachers and school leaders, they are not very comfortable with this idea of competing against other countries, because I think for the Finns, education is more an issue of cooperation, sharing, showing others what we have done, and that's why I'm here. Because I fully agree with you what you say, that there are many things that not only America, but other countries can learn from Finland. And I must tell you also something that I said last night that is also true, and it is that much of the Finnish success, what you see if you visit Finnish schools or universities or classrooms, is because of the innovations and research and development that has been done during the past 100 years here in the United States of America. Okay? So if you come and visit a Finnish classroom and you ask the teacher there that where is this and that innovation idea coming from originally, if you date it back, if you just follow the track, somehow it, in most cases, will come back here to the United States. So it's very important to keep this in mind, that the Finnish school system is built on American ideas, including the overall kind of a philosophy of Finnish education that is coming from the thinking of your great president Thomas Jefferson more than 200 years ago. Okay? For many people, Jefferson is the education president in this country, and people like John Dewey after Jefferson, who was probably the best known American philosopher and educator in the world, very much thought about education system for children what he would now be able to see in Finland. So we have been very much committed and kind of loyal to the American ideals and ideas in building our school system. And that's why if you need any further motivation to come and visit our schools, you take this, that in Finland you can see what American education system could be at its best. Because it is actually built on American ideas. Okay? Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. I have my website here. So if you want to, probably tonight or tomorrow morning, I'll put this presentation there. So if you want to go and revisit some of the images and pictures, you can go and do that. And this is my Twitter account. So if you want to follow what's happening in education in Europe and particularly in Finland or in the world, I'm tweeting mostly about interesting things happening in school education. And this is my little book. I have actually one book to give away as a door prize today. So if you bear with me and you stay until the very end, there will be one lucky one who will get the copy of this book. For those who can't, you can always go and get yourself one. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm gonna speak about the following thing. In the first half of my presentation, I'll speak a little bit about Finland and some of the things that I think you need to know. In the second half of my presentation, I'll show you how Finnish education thinking fits into the world, kind of a global movements. And in the third half of my presentation, so we have about 7 math teachers in the audience. In the third half of my presentation, I'll show you some of the things, probably about 3 things that I think are driving making the Finnish school system, education system as it is today. Okay? Are you ready for this? And it's going to be in English, of course. Do you understand my English, by the way? Yeah. One thing you need to know about Finland is that Finland is a bilingual country, so everybody in Finland has to have 2 have to be able to speak 2 domestic languages. Okay? Finnish is my first language and Swedish is the second one. We have about 6% of people who do it the other way around. The Swedish is the first language and Finnish is the other one. But then everybody, all the Finns, they speak English nowadays, all the young people, and all the high school graduates also have a second foreign language. So there are 3 languages on the top of your mother tongue that most of the Finns speak. And I belong to those who, by the way, who believe that one of the best ways to enhance overall academic performance in the school is to help and insist that children must learn another language. Because language learning, also through the research, we know that if you have to learn another language when you're young, it will boost your academic performance otherwise. So one idea to think about here in Texas is to introduce another language that everybody should learn and have access to learning schools. Okay. Now, if I show you this word here, I always want to start my presentation by hearing a little bit. What do you think? What is the image that you see? No. Most people see exactly this. Not much, because Finland is a kind of a strange thing. But what do you see? When you close your eyes or you just let these images pass your mind, when you read the magic word Finland, what do you see? Snow.
Snow.
Okay. How many of you see snow and ice and cold? Most people. Something else?
Fish.
Fish. Oh, good. Something more?
Literacy.
Okay, literacy. I don't know how it looks like, but good. Something more?
Phone.
What's that?
Phone. Phone.
Phone.
Yeah.
We used to have Nokia, but not anymore. Nokia is now American thing. Yeah? But many people in the early years they saw Nokia as a thing. Okay. It's interesting because almost everywhere I go, this is kind of an image, common image that people have about Finland. And the point here is that if it's difficult for you to imagine how the country looks like, what is Finland, it's practically impossible to make any sense out of these headlines that you often see that says that Finland has one of the highest performing school systems in the world, that you have seen now during the last 12 years at least. If the image is like this, so you cannot really connect what you think you know about Finland to what you read in the newspaper and media. Okay, so that's why I think it's important to take a look at some of these images. I'll show you just a couple of 3 pictures that are from Finland. So this is how Helsinki looks like. It's one of the most beautiful cities. What I think is next to the train station. Buildings look pretty much like, not these buildings really, but over there, like St. Petersburg, for example, because Finland, we share the history and architecture with the Russians all the way until 1917 when we became independent. But it's a beautiful city, and about 2/3 of Finns now live in cities. Okay, so 40 years ago it was 2/3 of Finns lived in a countryside, and we had a lot of poverty, a little bit like you have nowadays. You know that more than 20% of American children come from poor homes. We had about a similar situation in the 1960s or early 1970s when Finland looked very different. Okay. Finland is a huge country, so we have most parts of the country is wilderness. We have a lot of bears. We have a lot of bears now because they come from Russia. There's no food anymore, so they immigrate to Finland to eat our berries and mushrooms. But this is a beautiful part of the countryside where you can really do a lot of outdoor things. And this is where Finland is. One thing is good to keep in mind that we are about 6 million people, but this is a big country compared to. It's probably a little bit too big here compared to the others. But Finland is about the size of Sweden, Spain, France, and a little bit bigger than Italy. Okay, so it means that if we are living in a large country but only 6 million people, 5.5 million people, it means that we have a lot of remote villages and areas where school education is also important. We have about 200,000 lakes here, 200,000 sweetwater lakes, and about 100,000 islands here around the coastline. Russia is here, so we have a long border with Russia now. And we are part of the Scandinavia, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland. So this constitute what we call the Nordic countries. Okay, that's where we are. And of course, a very important part of Finland nowadays is that Finland is part of the European Union. European Union looks like this: 28 countries. And we are there also having the common currency, so we have the euro currency, unlike Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, that still have their own currency. So that's why Finland is a little bit different also there in the Nordic countries. I'll show you some of the things that I think is kind of useful for you to keep in mind now in the beginning when we start to answer the question that what is behind of this Finland success, and is there anything that Texas or the United States or anybody else can learn? This is a kind of a foundation of our school system, and I'm not going to go into the details of how it operates. If you want to read more, just go to my website and there's all this information. But unlike most other countries, we have school system where children start to go to school when they're 7. Okay, so it's relatively later than in many other countries, and we have compulsory education only 9 years. Okay, so when our kids have done 9 years of schooling, they're free to do whatever they want to do. So they're normally about 15 or 16 years old when they have freedom to choose either to continue schooling or do something else. And of course, in Finland, we would like to see everybody continuing in high school. Okay, but we cannot force anybody to do it because it's their free will. We have a 1-year preschool here that is optional for parents. About 98% of children go to free school. And then we have an early childhood program before that is a universal, and it's a children's right in Finland to have access to daycare if they want to. It's not parents' or mothers' or fathers' right, it's a child's right to have a high quality daycare system, okay? So here, this basic school, we don't really allow charter schools, or we don't have any private schools in Finland. We have a very small number of those, but it's fairly difficult to start to operate those things. So in other words, we insist that everybody will go to the similar type of public basic school in Finland. Okay? So it's actually against the law. It's a constitutional violation to ask tuition fee for education that is leading to qualification or degree. So that's why we don't have private universities or private high schools or any type of private institutions where your parents have to pay money for education. It's considered as a basic human right in Finland for everybody. And not only for Finns, but also for those who move to Finland, for example, from here, the United States. Okay? So education is free. There's no streaming or tracking here within this basic school, so all the classrooms are socially mixed. They are mixed also in terms of the ability. And this is a basic responsibility of every school principal in Finland to make sure that the classrooms are mixed, that there's a diversity there. So the principal cannot arrange the classrooms so that we have the bright kids in one class and then the others. That's a huge violation of the ethical code in Finland. Okay, so then we have what you call a high school system. We have two types of high school. One is the kind of a general, we call it the upper secondary school, where about 50%, half of these kids will go. And then we have the vocational high schools, where we have almost equal representation nowadays. About 45% of Finnish 16-year-olds will go to this vocational high school. And then we have this 5% of which some of them will go to the optional 10th grade here. And then unfortunately, some of them will leave and they will come back to school at some later point. But that's one of the biggest problems we have in the system now, that we would like to keep everybody in there within this system, okay? And this high school, this is a different story, but it looks very different to what your high schools are here, because it's a fully personalized, it's a design based on the interests and needs of young people. There are no grades like you have 10th, 11th, 12th grade. We have a kind of a gradeless organization, and so we cannot really say that high school in Finland is 3 years, because it can be 3 years or 4 years or 5 years based on what the young people want to do. There's no grade repetition there because we don't have grades. It's an interesting thing. If you don't have grades in a school, you cannot repeat the grade. And everybody knows that if you have to repeat the grade, many of these kids at some point they drop out from the high school, because it's not really a smart remedy anymore, okay? And then we have the higher education university system. We can take about 60% of those who graduate from one or the other type of high school into universities, and remember, it's all free. Finnish parents will never need to worry about the college fees or anything like this. It's the kind of a numerus clausus principle to get into the universities or polytechnics there. So everybody has to walk through the same door, but as soon as you're in there, you never pay anything for your studies. Actually, government is paying, if you're not living with your parents, like my older son is doing that, the government is paying all the full-time students about $750 a month grant to pay your rents and living, whatever it is. But students don't pay anything for their studies. So that's how the system looks like, and it's a very strong, we believe in a public school system in Finland, and as I said, it's very difficult to arrange or open any other type of alternative schools there even if you wanted to do that. Okay? So the other one is that the Finland is also a very equal society, and this is something that has everything to do with education. People often ignore this fact. They think that it doesn't matter how equal or unequal your society, country is, education system can always, overcome those things, but I don't think so. I think we have to be mindful with that. If this is the average of the income inequality that is on this side, so more unequal countries are here and more equal nations are on this side, and this is the average also the educational performance, better performance is here and low performance is here. My question to you is that where do you think the United States is? Is this a fire alarm again? So where would you put the United States in this map? Somewhere here. Okay, this is where America is, and everybody knows that the United States today is one of the most unequal societies, nations in the world. Okay, there are very few countries that have more inequality than the United States. Some people say that inequality here in America is at the same level as it used to be in 1780s, 230 years ago. So it means that how the wealth, the enormous wealth that you have in this country has been divided between the people, those who have and those who have not. Okay? So it's a big issue. This is where Finland is, and you will see that the educational performance in the United States is a little bit below the OECD, the international average. In Finland it's much higher than the average. But we are also very, very equal compared to the United States. And now when people tell me that you cannot compare Finland with the 6 million people, homogeneous, tiny little country in northern Europe, to the United States, a 320 million people, large, huge country with all these diversities, of course we can say this. But I think the big difference that we have between our countries is exactly this one. Okay? And this makes our countries look very, very different in terms of how do we deal with this wealth that is actually quite equal in terms of per capita in our countries. So Finland is almost as wealthy as the United States, but we treat dividing this wealth across our nation, the people, very differently. This is where Canada is, and this is where some of the other about 22 wealthiest nations are. And you will see that there's a kind of interesting correlation between the income inequality and the quality of education. This shows you that when the inequality gets worse or higher, then also the countries tend to perform less well in education. The children's learning in math and reading and science will decline. So that's why a smart idea is that if you want to get higher here, one way to do it is to think about the income inequality in your country as well. Okay. Then the next one is that Finland is doing fairly well in many things. There are many, I meet sometimes people who say that Finland is a funny country because they only do well in education and maybe in one or two other things. But if you look at the international rankings and comparisons that you can easily find in the internet, this shows you it gives you an idea how well Finland is doing compared to the United States in many of these important areas like business, economy, technology, or innovation, for example. Okay? And make no mistake, Finland is not a socialist country. Finland has nothing to do with the socialism. Finland is one of the most capitalist, competitive, open market economies in the world. And socialism has nothing to do with Finland. We have to be very careful with this one. Let me show you, take these things away there that relate to more about how the business and economy works, which is also important. And if we look at some of the social indicators here and public policy indicators that are closer to children and families and education, okay? Some of these things tell you immediately how different Finland and the United States are. Or just take this one, how these two countries are empowering women in the politics, okay? Finland is the second best country in the world in terms of what role we give women in our politics, how strong is women's voice when political decisions are made. United States is number 55. It's not a good place to be. So it means that you are not really, in this country, women's voice in politics, in Congress and in the House, it's not often heard. And my point here is that what are women often speaking about in politics if they want to improve things? They often speak more than we men, I think. They speak about things related to children, their health and happiness, and also education, early childhood, all these things, okay? And if you're not hearing those things, I think it's no wonder that you, for example, in the United States, have not progressed further with the early childhood issue, for example, that is extremely important, or healthcare, because it's not evenly debated in the politics, okay? Child poverty rate, Finland is the best country to be a mother, so if you want to have a child, come to Finland. We give everybody a 12-month, fully paid parental leave, okay? And parents can stay home until the child is 3 if they want to without losing their jobs. And government is paying you to do that, okay? Of course, all the health and all the other services are included free of charge for everybody, okay? Child well-being is extremely important. The United States is number 26 among 29 countries that UNICEF has been comparing. So I just want to show you this, that our countries are very different, but more than that, it is that Finland is a good place to be overall. So my theory based on this picture is that maybe there is nothing secret or mysterious in education. Maybe it's because of the good system that we have that kind of helps children learn in a school and helps schools to do what they are supposed to do. So that's why, when people read these things, your media often reports things like this, like, if you want to live the American dream, you have to come to Finland, This is not our biggest newspaper. This is one of the best-known American newspapers based on this when they were reporting in some of these news over there. So let me give you this is the second part of my presentation here, and let's look at how Finland compares to the rest of the world. This is an interesting question. Is Finland really a unique country among all the other countries in the world, or is it so that Finland is just doing the same things as Texas or United States or England or other countries, but because we are small and homogeneous and wealthy and smart, we are just able to do this better than everybody else. Okay? These are the two options, that we either walk our own way, do things in a very different way, have a different way of thinking about education, or we are doing the same things that everybody else, but we just are smarter to do that. Okay? So what I'm going to show you is very quickly is the thing that I call global educational reform movement. And I must say that I'm a scientist and a scholar as well. And actually I'm going to move to work in Harvard University in January to be a professor there for several years, hopefully. I'm very happy to come back to the United States. And scientists often look at these things through kind of theories, okay? And that's what I used to do. When I was a young man and went to teacher education in Finland a long time ago, I was so passionate about education and raising children. I didn't have any kids, but I had 2 theories how to educate children if I had some. Okay? Now I have 2 boys, but no theories anymore. So that's how it happens often in education. So this is not a theory, this is a kind of an idea that helps me and my colleagues to understand how different countries are doing and what's really happening around the world. That this is much more complicated thing to explain in detail than we have time here. So I'm just going to show you some of these symptoms or ideas that I have recognized. I've been working in about 50 different countries in all the continents of the world and met several people who are leading their education systems, and this thinking is based on that. So these 4 ideas here are kind of a typical things that I can find from education system to an education system when I ask the question that, what do you think are the best ways to improve the quality of your schools? Okay, so I have identified these things. Sometimes they are strongly presented in the education policies and plans, sometimes less so, okay? But the most common thing is now, today, kind of increasing faith in competition. In other words, if only we can put teachers and schools in a kind of a situation where they have to compete against other schools, other teachers and principals, somehow quality will go up, just like it does in business, okay? Everybody knows this in business, and you know it much better than anybody else, that if you want to get the quality high and price down, you increase competition in the marketplace. And that's why you can buy cheaper oranges when you have to compete against somebody else who's trying to sell these things. So this same idea has been now implemented very widely in education throughout the world, okay? The second one is the idea of standardization. So people think that if only we had a higher standards and more kind of a rigor expectations for everybody, somehow the quality of teaching and learning will enhance, improve. When people know where they should be aiming at, okay? So this prescribed standardization has become a kind of a global movement. That's why it's a second symptom of this. If you take the first letters of the global education reform movement, you get the idea of germ. Yeah, you know germ? It's like a virus, because these ideas are really spreading around the world like a little bit like virus. Third one is the idea of increased role of standardized testing and using standardized test results to hold teachers and schools accountable for students' test results or learning, okay? This is not an American phenomenon only. This is happening in an increasing number of countries around the world. Many of them are, by the way, they are looking at the United States, what you are doing, or England, and they are doing these things because they think that you are doing these things in a right way, okay? So that's why this standardized testing has become a kind of a common thing around really around the world. And then the fourth one is the school choice, increasing faith in the idea that if only there were more choice for parents through private schools and charter schools and all sorts of other arrangements, that this will enhance, improve competition, and then all the quality will go up because of this choice, okay? So you know these things very well. And there was a newspaper picture that I captured for you from Texas that I think very well catches this idea that the higher standards are here, but the school funding is still kind of remained in the same level, and that's why this poor pupil here has been asked to do something that is practically, in many cases, impossible thing to do in this given conditions. So now I leave it up to you to think about how much you see these elements of germ present here in the Texas, in your education life and education policies here. I don't know enough to make any comments about these things, but I can show you how the germ looks like in many parts of the world when it gets really kind of a common place in education systems. This is how Finnish primary school classroom looks like nowadays. Okay, we have a lot of diversity in Finland as well, particularly in our metropolitan and urban areas. So we have different types of students there with the different abilities and different languages and different aspirations and different expectations and many other things. And certainly different types of skills that they are able to do. And now if the system is doing what this examiner or teacher or system is saying, that everybody has to perform the same thing for the sake of the fairness, in this case, you know what happens is that many of these pupils will fail before they even start, right? So what do they learn in a culture like this, in a kind of a germ-infected school culture? They learn what Einstein was saying. I think Einstein captured this very nicely. He said that if we judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And what I believe, to be completely honest with you, is that what many people learn, young people in Finland and here in the United States, rather than they would learn how exciting science or math or other things are, that they will learn that they are not good in math or not good in science because they cannot do these things that the standardized tests or standardized curricula are asked them to do, because we are not taking into account these individual personalized needs and here, okay? So this could be a picture of the germ-infected education system, okay? So how the germ has spread, you may ask, where is it happening? And it all started in England in 1988, came here to North America, then to Australia, New Zealand, and boom, then to the rest of the world, okay? So I've been working and speaking in all of these places, and I've always asked people that have you seen the germ infection in your school system or schools? And that's why I have these dots here in South Africa, in India, in Southeast Asia, in the Gulf states here, Eastern Europe, Spain, and see this little dot here in Sweden. This is where Stockholm is. So this is how the world looks like. This looks a little bit like, remember the summer 1983, what happened then? 30 years ago, in the summer of 1983, the world discovered this wicked thing called HIV and AIDS. Okay, and the first things we started to see was the kind of a world map where these infections have been identified. And now we are living by the same type of thing, that we are able to see the infections, germ infections around the world, and we have to do the same thing that we did with the HIV and AIDS, as it came as a kind of a threat to humankind. And we have to start to talk about this, right? And we need to know what we are talking about, because I think, and I know actually, that many of these germ elements are really harmful for, not only for children, but they're very harmful for teachers and parents and the countries and their economies as well. So that's why this is equally serious thing than the HIV and AIDS 30 years ago, and we need to do something about this thing. Finland has remained fairly uninfected, so we are still kind of immune to these ideas, and I will show you in a minute how does it look like in Finland. There may be somebody here who will say that, just wait a minute, that maybe there is a place in the world where competition, standardization, standardized testing, accountability, choice, ICT, technology and online learning, these things have really proven to be a good solution and have been able to improve the quality of children's learning. Okay, I'll show you this. This comes from the OECD PISA database. So first of all, let me explain to you what I have here for you. First of all, I have countries here that I think at some point in the 1990s or even earlier, they have had this germ infection. In other words, in these countries, education policies have been relying on competition, standardization, testing, and some of these other things, okay? In some places more than in some other places, but somehow they have been there. And we are looking at the 15-year-old math students, math results in 2000, 2003, 2006, and 2009. Okay, so we are looking at the 4 consecutive OECD PISA studies. And anybody here can see very easily that none of these countries that I claim have had a germ infection, none of them have been able to improve these results in math. And it's the same thing in science and in literacy, all right? Do you want to ask now?
I don't want to. Sorry to interrupt, but the global education reform movement.
Right.
So, I mean, that's not good.
It may be good or it may be bad, but in these cases that I'm showing you, it has had very negative consequences. And you can take a look at here.
Sure, because I just thought there's the competition or the awareness with the
Yeah.
world, so I thought it was good germs at first.
No, well, I'll leave it up to you to decide. I think it's been a harmful, bad thing because it's been not able to do what the politicians and policymakers have claimed, that competition and testing and standardization and all these things happen. But there are some, you're right, there are some good elements there too, like a more systematic focus on learning and higher expectations for everybody. And education for all is a good thing globally. But these things that I'm showing to you have seem to be a kind of a problematic issue. So none of these countries have been able to get better. Many of them have been systematically declining. So the results, learning results in these international studies are worse and worse every time, which indicates that there have been something wrong in the policy in the 1990s and later on that has not been able to do what they were supposed to do. This is Finland, and you will see that Finland started already in a fairly high in 2000 and has been able to improve, except the last one, but still the kind of a gradient is still positive and the direction has been good. And now, what Finland has done is almost exactly the opposite of what the global educational reform movement thinking has been. So it's not only that Finland is doing competition and standardization and testing a little bit differently, but it's almost the opposite. And that's a kind of an interesting case in the case of Finland, that we are doing things in a so different way. So collaboration rather than competition, meaning that we believe that when schools cooperate, when teachers work together and principals help one another, across the districts and between the districts as well, this will be better than competition. Personalization or customization of education rather than standardization is something that we believe in. I often argue that Finland has the most individualized school system in the world because the law requires in Finland that school education has to be organized based on individuals' needs. I don't know any other school system that says it so clearly, and that's why kind of a standardization is illegal in Finland, because it breaks this code of individualization. So we have standards in Finland, but the standards are set by each and every school. So teachers' responsibility is to set the standards for their own school using the national framework curriculum that is giving guidelines how this standard setting should be done at the level of every school. We trust our teachers and we speak about responsibility rather than employ standardized tests and external accountability. It's a very different concept. If you take a closer look, in my book I define accountability as something that is left when responsibility is taken away. Okay? So accountability is something that is there when we subtract responsibility out of the equation. Okay? And this is how it works in Finland. And then the equity issue here that I'm going to speak a little bit more about. Okay? So how do you see this? It is different, right? So my point here is that Finland is not only doing things in a kind of a little bit different way, but this is that's why I call it the Finnish way, because it's Finland's own way. And there are some other countries that are doing the same things, like Singapore and Canada, some of the Canadian provinces, and even South Korea. Some of these things, but not all of them. Okay, let's go to the last one. And this is I'm going to look at some of these things that I think are behind of Finland's success. And let me go back to this equity question, because I see that some of you are asking already, so what do you mean by equity in education, what it is?
Is that the financing?
No. It's partly that, but it's not only that one. Okay, let's go here, and I'll show you what I mean by equity. Now, one of the inventions that I have done using the international data that has not been done by others to the same extent is that rather than looking at the quality, or as you call it here, excellence of education systems, I add here another dimension, that is this equity. Okay, so I'm looking at the quality of the education system and the equity of the system simultaneously. Okay, so rather than saying that the United States is 5th in reading and 7th in math and 27th in science. Now I forget this for a moment and define this whole performance and quality of the system in a little bit different way. So equity here means, and we have to be very clear about this, equity in my presentation here and in my text when I write about it means that we are looking at the children's family background, in other words, where they come from. What are the parents doing? What are the parents' education? And how much wealth the family has? And then how well these kids are doing in the school. Okay? So if the thing is that wealthy parents with a higher education and good jobs for both parents, if these kids are doing well in the school, it means that there is less equity in the system. If at the same time the children who are coming from the single parents, immigrant background, low income family, and these kids are not learning very well as they do in most other countries, then we say that this system is not having a high equity, okay? So high equity means that children's family background doesn't really determine their educational fate and success that much, okay? So weaker the relationship between the family background and educational performance, the higher the equity is. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay? So this is the average of these two variables. Average of quality learning outcomes and equity. So if the country has higher equity, in other words, the relationship between home and success in school is weaker, okay? It means that the countries move that way, okay? And those education systems that have less equity will find their place somewhere here, meaning that the education system is kind of just enforcing the differences and diversity that children bring with them into the school, okay? And now my question to you is that where is the United States? You were there last night, so I'm not allowing you to answer. Think about it. Say a word to the person who is sitting next to you. Just 1 minute. I'll take my prize from here. So where is the United States of America? And it's a kind of a tricky question because there's no education system called American education system. You have 50 states and 15,000 districts and they all have their own things. But somehow America is seen as a one unit. But where would you put America? Where? Here? And lower? Okay, so anybody who would like to try to give an explanation, why do you think America is here? The first one will get the book. Okay, yes.
I was going to say that I think that the culture of the United States is very competitive. So when you're always thinking there's not enough for everybody, then you're always fighting over there. You're not allowing more of the opportunity for everybody because you're just afraid you're not going to get enough.
Okay, wonderful. You got the prize. Let's give it a good hand. And this is where the United States is. It's a surprisingly good position, right? Because I know that many of you thought that you would be somewhere here. Well, first of all, let me say this, that you are, depending a little bit how you look at this thing, but in terms of the learning outcomes, you are very close to the international average. It's just a tiny little bit below the surface, but not much. But then the equity is not that bad, okay? You're just this 1 inch away in the negative side of the international average, okay? So what does it mean? Remember the inequality, the income inequality picture, where you were here? You know, if you take this inequality that you have in this country, America being one of the most unequal nations in the world, this alone would kind of advise you to predict that United States must be somewhere, okay? But it's not. And it means that there's something extremely strong in your public school system. 90% of Americans go to public school. And that this public school system is able to equalize some of these extreme diversities that you have in this system in a very, very good, unique way, okay? So make no mistake, I don't belong to those who say that American school system is broken. You know, if it was broken, you would not be here, okay? Of course, this is not a good place to be, okay? Where America should be, you would like to be here with a high equity and high quality. And do you know how this place is called? It's called heaven. Yeah? It's the education of heaven, and that's where your leaders would like to take you. But you know, the problem is that when I look at the American policies and discussion on education, it's so much focusing on quality, on standards, and assessments, and technology, and leadership, and all these things, and so little is paid attention to making the system more equitable, okay? And take a look at this. This is England, this is Sweden, and this is most of the other OECD countries in the same study. And you will immediately see that somehow this data shows you that equity and quality in the systems is somehow linked together, okay? So there are no countries here with a very high equity and low quality, or very high quality and low equity, except Singapore. Singapore is the only outlier here. Very high learning results, but weak in equity. But these three guys are in heaven already: South Korea, Canada, and Japan. And the highest performing English-speaking school system is the province of Alberta in Canada. They also have oil and gas there. There's probably a pipeline running through the continent from Alberta to here to Houston. This is the keystone thing that they're trying to bring, okay? So you can also transfer some of the educational ideas through this pipeline, okay? So go to Alberta if you want to see how they make this system work very well. They have the same diversity that you have here and many other issues. Child poverty is fairly high there as well, so Alberta is a good place to be. Very much like Finland. We are doing a lot of cooperation with these countries, okay? So this is heaven, and you know, these guys are here. It's almost like a stairway leading to heaven. You remember this song, Stairway to Heaven? Think about the song when you think about school improvement and education policies, that if you want to get to heaven, and I think Texas would deserve to get there, but I can tell you one thing, you're not going to get there unless you take equity more seriously. There's no country in the world that has been able to go to heaven without looking at equity more seriously, okay? And this, what it means is another story, but you have to look at the early childhood programs, wealth and well-being during the school, special education for everybody early on, school funding, you mentioned that. Your school funding is funding actually inequality and inequity rather than equity. So you have to rethink some of these things if you want to get have more equity, and if you get more equity, you also get more quality, and that's how simple it is, okay? But where's Finland here? Can you see Finnish flag? Ladies? I'll give you a hint how Finnish flag looks like. It's the most beautiful flag in the world. Okay, it's here. You know, this is where Finland was in 1972, about 40 years ago, when we started to build this system that you saw in the beginning. The system where everybody will go to the same school, no private schools. All the schools are good schools, okay? This was our philosophy, that we want to have every school is a good school for all the children, okay? And this is what has happened during the last 40 years. If you pay attention to this most beautiful flag in the world, you will see what has been the way of Finland to probably get to heaven, okay? And this is what has happened. Do you want to give a little hand to Finland too? I think it's a significant story during the last 30 or 40 years that we have been investing in equity heavily, and then by investing in equity, making the school system more equitable, the quality has somehow enhanced automatically, okay? Interesting thing, it's a very interesting thing. And you know, now the good news for you is that there are, as everybody knows, there are 5 seats in heaven. So there's a room for one country there, given that all these 4 guys will stay there. I don't know if Finland is able to stay in heaven too long, but if the United States, if you want to go to heaven, tell your policymakers and leaders that we are not going to go to heaven unless we take equity more seriously, unless we build this system also so that it will be good for everybody. And you have to move beyond the rhetoric of trying to help all these children. This is where Finland can serve as an inspiration, just like Canada and some other countries. Important thing. The second one is my idea of less is more, and just let's go this through quickly because my time is running out already. But this will show you how junior high school teachers teach in different countries, how many hours they have in their teaching load annually, okay? So we just compare different countries within the OECD, and here you will see that here in the United States you have almost 1,100 hours allocated classroom time for typical junior high school teachers program, okay? This is where Finland is, and Finland has about 600 hours. It's almost half of that, meaning that Finnish teachers are teaching much less than your junior high school teachers here in the United States. This is how it looks like if we take all the other countries away. So it means that Finnish teachers have about 2 hours less time, teaching time every day compared to your teachers here. So that's why our teachers have time to work together with others. They can focus on student assessments because we don't have standardized testing. It means that the teacher's job is to evaluate and grade their kids. They need time for standard setting and curriculum planning and professional development and school improvement. All these things constitute a very significant part of the time in every day in teachers' work in Finland. The other one is the students. If we look at how long students sit in a classroom between the ages 7 and 14. So we're looking at this kind of a span of children's lives when they're 7 and 14, 8 years of their school life. You will see that Finland has the smallest number of compulsory instruction hours of all the countries in the world. Okay, so it means that we have a shorter school days and less time every day to sit in a classroom, whereas United States is here. And again, this difference between United States and Finland is about 2 years in favor of American kids. So your children have about 2 years more schooling before they sit in the same international study at the age of 15, okay? And your children go to school when they're 6, right? In Finland it's age 7, remember that? So there's another year, okay? So there's a significant difference there, and again, goes back to this less is more or less is better idea, that it's not always a good idea to think that if kids are not learning, we need to have a shorter summer breaks or more homework or something like this. Actually, we have a homework policy that is focusing much less on homework than here in Finland. We have homework, but much less focus on homework than here in the United States. We do not spend any time in our school system for preparing our children or students for any type of tests because we don't have any external standardized tests except this high school leaving examination when kids are already about 19 years old. And finally, we don't have no after-school tuition like many of the Asian countries have. In South Korea, 80% of children go to after-school tuition. After spending a long hours in school, they go to evening school. In Finland, we never do these things. And then finally, the last one here is the how much money we are spending. And this is a kind of an interesting thing also to ask, that maybe Finland is doing so well because we put a huge amount of money into school system. And remember, whole education system is publicly financed in Finland. So I'll show you how much governments are spending in education systems in different parts of the world. This is where United States is. So you have one of the most expensive education systems in the world, and your results are a little bit lower than the international average. This is where Finland is. We have one of the cheapest, not cheapest, but we have relatively cheap education system and fairly high results. This is where Canada is and some of the other countries. And again, we can see the same thing, that the correlation is negative, meaning that the more money you spend on education, the less results you seem to get out of it. So money never seems to be a kind of a solution to this. Okay? I think here in the United States, what you need to look at more carefully is that where the money is going. Are you really spending what you have on right things? Are you spending money on those who really need resources to be able to be successful? And are you paying salaries to right people? Yeah? You know, one thing here in America is that your teachers are very poorly paid, yeah, compared to many other countries, and that's one thing. But then you seem to have a lot of personnel, a lot of stuff under the education payroll that have nothing to do with schools or education itself. A lot of administration and bureaucrats and all sorts of other things, okay? Okay, in Finland we have about 80% of those who are under education payroll, they are employed in schools. Here in the United States is about 50%. So you have half of the staff doing something that is not really helping children at all. Okay, so that's how we are, again, very different here. And then this would be a third one. This is about my niece. I go this through very quickly. This is my sister's daughter. And she's a kind of a typical Finnish young person. When she was leaving high school, when she was 19, with the very high grades and results in the examination and in her high school diploma, she wanted to become a primary school teacher. And primary school teachers in Finland, they have to study master's degree in one of the research universities that we have. And she wanted to get there. Okay? So she asked my advice, and a little bit later she called me and she told me that she was rejected. And I wanted to know that, so what happened? As a highly talented and motivated young girl was not accepted to the primary school teacher education program. In the United States and many other countries, this type of candidate would have been accepted with fanfares. Yeah, if somebody like her wants to become a primary school teacher, but not in Finland. And the reason was that she was not able to convince the panel in the individual personal interview why she wants to be a teacher rather than a lawyer or doctor or businessman or something like this, that her grades would have allowed her to go immediately. And she was not able to explain other than saying that because my uncle is a teacher and her mother is a teacher too, but that was not enough to convince the professors that I really know what I'm going to do in my life. So I asked her to go and work as a teaching assistant for a year and then apply again, which she did. And now she graduated last year as a primary school teacher, and she will be teacher for life. She will never leave. Okay? And that's a big difference, again, between Finland and many other countries. Look at this. Last spring, we had 8,500 candidates to our primary school teacher education programs. Many of these candidates are exactly like my niece. Very able and very talented and kind of a right match for being a primary school teacher. And we only took 750. And all of these 750 are very carefully examined. All of them are there because they really want to be teachers. And all of them, the 750, they graduate on time, and most of them will go and work in a school for life. Okay? So that's the big difference. So I'll leave you with some of these lessons that there are many ways to kind of compose these lessons for audience like this that I think you could consider or think. I'm not saying that I'm completely right with these things. I'll just leave these lessons for you so that you can take them with you and think about it if you have dinner conversation about education as it happens to be here in the United States often. You know, I lived 5 years in Washington, D.C., but I'm fine now. And, you know, one of these things that I realized very early on was that education was so hot topic in every dinner and gathering when parents got together and they started to argue about education. So take some of these lessons and try test them with your friends. And I don't want to offend anybody with this. This is just take me as a kind of a honest, ignorant alien here in the great state of Texas, and I just say what I think to you. The first thing I think I would recommend is that I think you would be able to do with much less focus on standardized testing throughout the United States, and particularly here in Texas, and try to build a system that would rely more on trusting schools, trust teachers, and trust what they do also in assessing and grading students. Okay? What I see the standardized testing system now doing throughout America is that it's not anymore testing whether children learn things. These standardized tests are increasingly used to test teachers and hold teachers accountable, and that has nothing, if you are in a testing business yourself or understand what they do, you cannot combine two purposes like this. You can have a test that will test teachers separately, but then you need another test that will test whether kids are learning, but you cannot combine these two. And that's a kind of a problem that you have here, that you try to use these tests for so many different purposes, and then in the end of the day, it doesn't work at all, what I think. So that's why I think a good solution here would be to gradually build this trust and try to see the system so that it will rely more on professionals, those teachers who are well prepared and trained to do what they do, and make sure that you have good leaders and that they have time to lead the school. Somebody told me this morning here that school leaders are spending so much time on bureaucracy and administration that they don't really know anymore what's going on in the classrooms. The second one is that I think this teacher quality question here, particularly here in the United States, should move away from teacher quality, kind of what teachers can do, what they know and can do, to this professional capital of teachers, which includes also what they can do together with their colleagues, with their networks, and how much they can draw from the fact that they are part of the decision making in their own schools. So teacher quality is not only how smart the person is, but it's also what this person can do with other people, how well they are connected, and how good they are in deciding what is important for them in a school. And the third one is the equity issue. I spoke about this already. I think choice and equity are kind of alternatives. So if I had to choose one of these, I would put the choice as a driving seat, and the equity as a driving seat and choice in the back seat, also here in the United States. And finally, I think you also need to consider again what type of education reforms you are putting in place. Because in many parts of the United States, I see that many of the reforms that I have seen here are not really based on evidence. Particularly, they're not based on international evidence. That what do we know about the reforms that work? I see much more things that could fall into this experimentation with children category. And it's not only America, there are many other countries that are designing and putting in place education reforms that are simply social experiments of people. Let's see what happens if you do something like this. And there's no evidence that this has ever worked in any way, any other country. And I leave you with this one. This is I have two sons, and my older son is already older, but this is our little boy. Isn't he nice? Yeah? In this picture, he's about 2 months old in our home, and look at these blue eyes. You can see so many things there. Now Otto is 18 months. So he's a little bit bigger, but same blue eyes and same look. And since I have to travel a lot, like a good father, I always do the same thing. Now when I left yesterday, I went to my son, and he had exactly the same blue eyes, and he's watching me. And before I can say anything that I need to say to my son, he tells me that, "Father, why do you have to go? Why do you have to go to the Texas and Houston? Because we need you here at home, me and your mummy, so stay here." And this is one of the most difficult questions in life. What do you say to your own son, knowing that he's right? Of course I should. Why should I go to Houston when I have somebody like this at home? So I have to say something. So I say that, Otto, when you were born in April 17th, 2012, there were 350,000 girls and boys who were born in the same day with you around the world. Many of them in the developing parts of the world. And the next day, 350,000 more. And another day, another 350,000. And I have to go to Texas now, because if I don't go and meet these educators and talk about the germ, and talk about the harmful things that it's doing in many parts of the world, that you and your sisters and brothers will not have a school that is a public school that I had or your mother had when we were like you. And then I say that I also think that if I don't go and speak about how important it is that children must play, that the school must have time to play for children, rather than insist that they will sit in a desk and learn for the standardized test at the age of 4, like it's done in many countries, that it will be bad for you. And before I can say anything else, he says, okay, Daddy, go to Texas, yeah? I'll come back. Thank you so much.